Hello, everyone. The time is now 12:03, and we will start our facilitation session. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be a part of this very impactful talk session that we're going to have. Our first person I would like to introduce would be Lila Hoagland. She's going to give us kind of like a why we're together. Lila, take it away.
Sure, thanks, Karen. It's good to be here. Good to see everybody this morning, and good to hear you as well, Bill. Hope things are going okay in Washington, D.C. I want to give you a little bit of background on why we're here and how we've gotten to this point. In recent years, a few years ago, questions were asked about the timing of PILD. And whether PILD really was too late in the calendar year and in the legislative year. And so at that point in time, we also began to talk about whether PILD should be connected with CARET. CARET is the Council on Agriculture Research, Extension, and Teaching. It is a volunteer group that lobbies on behalf of all of land-grant universities. And CARET and the AWS, the Administrative Heads section, which is primarily College of Ag Deans, those two groups typically meet sometime in the end of February or first part of March. And their primary purpose is to work with members of Congress to help set and support the budget, our federal budget. And so there was some discussion about whether we should be meeting jointly with that group and collaborating a bit more with that group. At that point in time, I had some conversations with the leadership of both NIFA, our National Institute for Food and Agriculture, our federal agency, and APLU, the Association of Public Land-Grant Universities leadership. And they both agreed at that point in time that, in fact, it was better to have an opportunity for people to be on the Hill working with members of Congress multiple times throughout the year rather than just one time in the year. And so we continued to maintain PILD then during our kind of April, beginning to mid-April time period. Then it was during this last year, again, this issue came up at a JSEP board meeting. And the question again was, is the timing of PILD most appropriate in order to have the greatest impact on the federal budget and on preparing the federal budget in particular? And so when that question was asked again, we started talking about whether we should really talk about or re-examine what the purpose of PILD was. Because up until that period of time, we had not incorporated PILD into the budget setting process, but it really was there in order to support the budget and to provide some background information for members of Congress. And so that kind of led us, if you will, to this discussion. In fact, as we began to talk about it among the PILD committee, one of the things that we said was not only should we make some decisions about whether or rediscuss whether the timing of PILD was right, but also what are the goals of PILD? What should we really be focusing on? And what does that say about who our target audience is for PILD? And so that's what really brought us to this session today. At the same time, there's been some discussions about developing a more comprehensive year-round advocacy effort. And as a result of that, we began to bring John Boren and the ECOP Budget and Legislative Committee into the discussion. Now, John was planning to be a part of our session this morning, but was called into a university administrative session. So he's not able to be here this morning, but he is very aware of this conversation and very interested in the outcomes of this conversation. Also, Doug Steele, the Vice President for Ag and Natural Resources at APLU, is interested and has expressed a lot of interest in trying to look at a more comprehensive year-round strategy for advocating on behalf of land-grant universities, including extension. And so, and so that is a little bit of background about what has brought us to this session today. So before we get into the actual facilitated session, what I thought would be useful is Bob Olensalin has put together a background piece around some history about PILD, how PILD was developed over the years, how it's changed, and how it's evolved. And we thought it would be useful for you to have a little bit of that information. I know that Bob sent that information out to people so that you'd have an opportunity to read it prior to this session. But what I'd like to do is turn it over to Bob now and ask him to just highlight some of the key points of that history so that we can all have that in our background and in our minds as we go into this discussion. So with that, Bob, why don't you take it away and talk a bit about background and history? Bob, you are muted. I can't hear you, so I'm hoping
I'm on now.
Okay, great. Thanks.
This was kind of a fun exercise for me to be involved in this. My first experience with PILD was back in the late 80s when NACAA had their own version of PILD. I was on the PILD planning committee in the late 90s and then have been involved with it through my work with ESP and now JSEP for a number of years. So it was kind of fun to go back and look at that. But JSEP was organized back in 1989. And one of the purposes of putting JSEP together was we had at that time 4 major organizations that were extension professional organizations, and each were doing their own thing. And as the conversation started, it was determined that they could probably serve the membership better if they worked together on some things. PILD was probably the first thing that they really worked together on. Perhaps the old regional leadership conferences was another area. But in 1993, the first JSEP Public Issues Conference was held, and it was held at the National 4-H Center. There were 31 people in attendance. Primary audience at that time was the elected officers, which now primarily would be the JSEP board members, but slightly expanded beyond that. And of course, it's grown to the peak number. The year of the Morrill Act celebration, the 150th anniversary of the Morrill Act, was the largest conference that there's been, and that was right at 340 people. So you can see that the conference has grown. One of the concerns that came about was the fact that we grew to 340, and we've now continued for the last several years to slide backwards, and I think this year we were in the about 170 people. The goal of the program at the conference has been really maybe threefold. One was to provide extension educators and extension faculty with the tools to be able to advocate for extension, and educate is probably the better word to use there, to educate decision makers. And of course, since it's been in Washington, D.C. at that particular time, we focus on the federal legislators, but in some of our more recent discussions, it's become readily apparent that we really need to be focusing on decision makers at all level. And so as you've looked at some of the topics, you'll see some of that has come to light in the topics that were displayed. It's an opportunity for those of us at the grassroots level to connect with our federal partner. For those people who are county-based people, which is what I was for 30 years, we have very little opportunity to connect with the federal partner. We don't understand particularly what we should about our federal partner, and don't have that opportunity to interact. PILD provides that opportunity, and one of the things that has been that I've seen over the period of time that I've been in contact with PILD is the increased relationship between our federal partner at NIFA and the attendees. We used to have the national program leaders come for a roundtable at breakfast that was not very rewarding, probably to either side. And now we have a really involvement with the national program leaders for a half a day at the session. And I think that's been beneficial to both the program leaders to understand the programs out at the grassroots level, and also for those of us at the grassroots level to understand the role of the federal partners. So that, I think, has been one of the things that I've seen that really has come to pass. That's been a real benefit from that. Finally, on the bottom of the handout that I sent, this shows I've been involved since 2012 as the executive director, and this shows what's happened to the numbers that we've had, and also the groups that they represent: the extension professionals, directors and administrators, volunteers, and then the total. And the thing that happened, I think Lila mentioned that the directors had a conference that was similar to PILD, and at a point in 2003, that was combined with PILD, so that we're all together, we're all talking the same story to the people in DC that we visit, and working together for the betterment of extension. I think that's been really good. One of the things that has been a little disappointing is, if you look at the number, if you have this in front of you, the number of volunteers, we had a high of 57 in 2014, and again, that was the 100th anniversary of extension, and that was probably something that peaked. But this last year we had 23, and so we've got about half the number of volunteers. And so in our discussions as a committee, because we've got half the number of people coming, we know that some of that may be budgetary, but the other thing is that the questions that have come up is this conference someplace that we need to be working with volunteers, or is that no longer a primary purpose? If it is, maybe the reason it's dropped off is we're not addressing the needs of those volunteers. So that's kind of an overview, a brief overview of PILD from 1993 to 2019.
Bob and Lila, thank you for that background information. And Bob, before I introduce our facilitator, could you please share your screen?
Can I do what?
Share your screen.
Share it?
With the PowerPoint.
I think Donna Ray's going to do that.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it is my pleasure to introduce Donna Ray Shepard. She is a state and national award-winning facilitator, trainer, strategic planner. She brings over 30 years of experience working with organizations before funding her own firm, Donna was the Leadership Development Specialist at the University of Minnesota Extension. She served over 25 years creating leading information tools and training. Donna worked as a county extension educator and a county extension director from 1981 to 1987. She has completed her PhD coursework in adult education at the University of Minnesota. Each year, Donna Ray assists dozens of public, nonprofit, and government groups to maximize their potential. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a expert to the highest here. Donna Ray, you may take it over.
Thank you, Karen, and welcome everyone. I am pleased to join in this conversation and wanted to give you a bit of the background of the process as you see it. So I think as both Lila and Bob explained, we really want to focus more on purpose and framework. And so our first couple hours together are for possibility thinkings, really about being on the same page about the outcomes, both about the impacts you want and how they may impact the broader community, as well as who that you're part of. And there's not, from my understanding and from our preparation conversations we've had, any outcome that we know that exists now. It really is exploration. And once we identify these impacts, we're thinking they may be similar to what they were in the past, or they may be different. That's a question we have. But if we can figure out how to make them even more significant. So we will take an hour break then. And when we come back, we're going to review some of the scenarios that arose from our conversation here and see if there's an option or two that you as a work team on this might support. And then those will go on to be written up and shared with others on your committee who were not available at this time. And actually it will go to Karen and your next committee meeting for action on that purpose statement and next steps. So I see my job today making sure that we share the participation, because it's a relatively large group, trying to stay on the agenda. And my metaphor for that is like we're thinking about a house design, craftsman, Victorian, ranch. But today on the call, we're not going to get to the level of either decorating the rooms or even determining whether there's a library, whether there's a den, and those sort of things. So we're trying to stay at that larger purpose level. And then I see my role as trying to synthesize what we hear, provide written comments. And so look for on your email some written comments from me during our break time, and then pulling it together at the end so that it feels like we have a product to move on. So with that, hopefully you can see my first slide here, our future PILD potential impacts and legacy. I would invite each of you to come up with 3, maybe 4 words to answer this first question. What outcomes are you striving for PILD participants? 3 to 4 words. Your part of extension, whether it's your professional association or whether it's your state or a region, but then overall, what do you see as outcomes for the whole system? 3 to 4 words. And then, because this is professional development toward a greater end, be curious what you think the outcomes are of the PILD conference for the broader community. So we'll take just a couple minutes, and I invite you to think of 3 to 4 words for each of the responses for what outcomes are you striving for. I see a few of you are continuing to jot and others are done, and just we will be moving relatively quickly. I do have time frames that I'm anticipating, but we'll see how this goes. So I would like to start with the first person I see on my screen, and then I'd ask that person to invite another committee member to share. So one of the things I find frustrating on medium-sized groups is hard to know how to merge onto that talk highway, because sometimes we want to do it at once. And I'd invite the speakers to be relatively concise so that we can hear from several on this. And again, this isn't necessarily our visioning time, but this is the checking in on and what you see now, and seeing how much commonality or difference there are. So Russ, you are at the top, so if you want to unmute yourself and begin, and when you finish your comments, I invite you to ask another committee member to speak next.
All right. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The three, I'm getting some feedback, so excuse me. I have value to legislators, I have effectiveness, and I have takeaways for communities. I kind of went over with the one word thing, but I cheated a little bit.
Thank you. And who would you like to hear from next?
I see Karen Munden is the next person below me.
Okay, thank you. For the first question, mine said increase the knowledge of Extension as a whole and being able to share resources across Extension. My second one was, again, increase the knowledge as a whole and being able to contribute to the resources and knowledge of Extension. And the last one is being able to articulate the relevance of Extension now and in the future. And on mine, I see Lala on mine that I have.
Okay, so some of the comments that I wrote in terms of outcomes for PILD participants, I think what I wrote was knowledge about how to tell Extension's story and how to be effective promoters of Extension and the land grant system. For Extension, as parts of the whole system, I have, what are the outcomes? Ultimately, I think the outcome is to increase decision maker support and ultimately increase funding for Extension. And in terms of the broader community, what I see as outcomes that we're striving for is increase their knowledge about Extension, and in reality, increase the support that they feel and the actions that they take toward Extension. So those are the things that I see. Let's see, I see Bill Hoffman's phone on. So Bill, I'm wondering if you have some comments about outcomes.
Yeah, I do, Lila. Thank you. I appreciate the information about the importance and how we've grown in interaction with the federal partner. And so I wanted to stay with that, being, representing the federal partner is, the main outcome that I see is, that understanding of the federal partner's role. And that's not an outcome, but an outcome of that is to be able to articulate the importance of funding streams at the federal level. Frankly, when I was in Extension, I was an ag guy, didn't know and was mystified by, why we had all of these or such a broad effort on nutrition education? Well, that's because we have some federal funding streams that support that. So again, articulate the importance of those funding streams. Participants should be able to contrast federal versus state versus local funding streams and be able to talk to either a federal, a state, or a local person about where each of those funding streams fit into supporting the larger whole. And I would think that if we are effective as a federal partner interacting with some of these folks, a side benefit of the conference would be that we would increase the effectiveness and the frequency of cooperative extension's participation in competitive and supporting competitive programs and competitive projects, and maybe getting them into the mix earlier, in the development of those projects, so they can better utilize, so that they can be better utilized and are a more equal partner. And so that's the three things that I have. And let me see. I'm at a little bit of a sensory disadvantage here, but I will call on Allie Mitchell to go next. Oh, she unmuted, so she must have heard me.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you for the opportunity. Okay, so a lot of this is going to be repeating what other folks have said. The three main outcomes that I guess is what I want for PILD, or what I expect from PILD, are developed advocates that have federal connections and comfort with the full context of extension. All of those build together, but keep it short and sweet. Thanks. So if you'd like us to keep passing, okay. How about we go to Tony?
Well, hello. A couple of outcomes that I had that I would hope we get out of PILD is an understanding and awareness of our federal part of our system, and then also being able to build partnerships and collaborate with our lawmakers. And I'm going to pass it to Travis West.
Thanks, Tony. PILD participants, mine was sort of along the same lines as Tony. So a better understanding among extension employees of the legislative process. When we talk about extension parts in the whole system, I thought of it more as a sort of the personnel angle. So thinking about a stronger ability system-wide to educate legislators about impacts of extension, and then as the broader community, sort of understanding extension funding and building skills for advocating on our behalf. And I will toss it to Karen Rederson.
Thanks, Travis. I appreciate it. For PILD participants, knowledge gain about extension, the interconnection of extension parts, and then maybe more subtly, but I feel it's important, is the excitement about extension and sharing our message, or that recharge if you've been part of extension for a while, because I've left a lot of PILD conferences having that based on some of our keynotes, and I think that's a critical part that we've shared. The extension participants, or the larger parts in the whole system, having that holistic view of extension, that relationship building, that national goal setting. Also learning those storytelling methods. Legislative awareness and support of our relevance. And for the future, I want our participants to use what they learn to continually share our story with our community. And I will go to Lynette.
Thanks, Karen. I don't think I really have any more to add. It's probably just said a little bit differently. For the PILD participants, I'm looking at individuals basically, and adding to their confidence level in presenting and speaking with or developing relationships with our elected officials. So individual skill building, and then similar to Karen, really more of a pride and extension, kind of re-energizing that pride of belonging to the Extension Service. I also have, as far as Extension parts of, and the system as a whole, is for all of us to be able to communicate Extension's value with our stakeholders, resulting in a more of a demand for Extension, therefore increased funding, hopefully, that they all go together. And then again, increasing the value of the Extension service to the community, resulting in more of a demand, a need for what we can offer to the community, and then increased support and also funding. And I'll pass it to Elaine.
Okay, I figured out how to unmute me. Yeah, one of the benefits of going towards the end is most people have already said a lot of the things that came across my mind. But one of the things that was not said, or that I think was not said, was for the Extension parts and the whole system is being able to document and capture the effectiveness of our programs and our education efforts, so that the broader community does see the value in us and be able to advocate on our behalf. And with the PILD participants, it's to give us the similar message so that we're all saying the same thing. We all become that lamppost of they can come to any Extension professional in any state and kind of hear the same message. So, and I am going to go down in my, did Jim Ekins go?
No, not yet.
Okay, I'll turn it over.
Great. So toward the first bullet point, is knowledge increase of national structure and funding and leadership. Toward the second bullet point, communicating our story to national leaders. Toward the third, it's an opportunity for us to understand broad Extension-related needs. And the significance of impacts, just a thought that no matter what, 5 or 6 years from now, we are going to be looking, no matter what, at telling our story to a new federal administration. So we have to keep it fresh and relevant. And I have no idea who I should go next here. Let's see. Bob Olenselin?
Okay, pretty much the same as the rest of you have mentioned. I think one of the things that I think that I have seen participants benefit from tremendously has been knowledge of the system. I mentioned that earlier in my comments earlier. I think that's really important. And then not only that, that as you educate about the system with decision makers, that you're able to educate about the entire system, not just your piece of it. So that, if I'm an ag person, I need to understand the importance and role of the 4-H program, community development, FCS, and Extension as a whole. Together, we're stronger than any one of the parts. I think that's important. And with that, then education of legislators of the value. As far as the Extension parts, I think creating the understanding among decision makers is important. And the purpose of why we're there is important. And then the broader community, I guess, so that we can continue to benefit the clientele, that we can provide education to people in our communities, and to provide a value to the community. And I will pass it to Elizabeth.
Yeah, everybody just pretty much said everything I had down, but I have a couple other words. Crafting a message. And then the other thing no one's mentioned is actually the politics, which is different than understanding your legislators. So what is the politics of cooperative extension and national government? That's it.
Looks like I'm trying to keep up here, but have we heard from Terrence yet?
Coming on. So everyone has pretty much said a lot of what I have. I have like the knowledge of how to report impacts of resources provided to elected officials, whether they be federal, state, or local. That's for PILD participants. For the parts and the whole system, a knowledge of the strategic plans for the extension systems, and NIFA, especially knowledge of ECOP strategic plans. And for the broader community, to be able to discuss the public value of extension, and to have them to help build support for continued and increased resources for extension. And how might these impacts be even more significant 5 years from now? We can't keep reacting to change, or else we'll be eaten alive.
And someone to pass it to. I am unsure if we've heard from Holly or Nadine.
Yeah, this is Holly. Again, most of what everyone's already said, but I put in no particular order, greater understanding of extension and its purpose, best methods or best practices for storytelling, and then highlighting our success stories, not only for the community to know what we've done, but also for success stories when we've worked with legislators, either with the state or federal. And I guess Nadine can go next. I don't think she's talked yet.
No, I haven't. And like you said, most everything's been said there. On PILD participants, engagement is something that I'm not really sure that has been said, but everybody being into the process with it and forming those connections nationwide with extension parts in the whole system. Some of the key things that stand out to me are that we're united and that we have a cohesive voice as we're talking to others, and the broader community of being able to tell their story about extension.
So who else haven't we heard from? We now may need to do the merge onto the highway. We haven't heard from you. Go.
I don't think we've heard from Julie yet, or Travis. Not sure who else.
This is Julie. I don't have anything to add that hasn't already been said.
Travis?
I think Travis already went.
Yeah, Travis has already gone.
There we go. Julie, is there anything you'd like to just, it's helpful too to say I had these things that came top of mind, and I know I grew up as a W in the alphabet, so I'm really comfortable with it's all been said ahead of me, but just also I think it's useful to hear where you had commonalities with what you jotted down, if you did.
So my commonalities were just increased knowledge and awareness, not only for participants about what we do at the federal level, but also making legislators and our federal partners aware of the good work that Extension is doing. And also hopefully exploring some partnerships.
So is there anyone else who we have not yet heard from on this PILD potential impacts and what outcomes you're striving for? Okay. So wanted to take a minute and say the outcome of this is a statement of purpose, and I believe we've heard multiple purposes to date, which doesn't surprise us. The question about thinking about now and into the next 5 years is there room for improvement if indeed some of the impacts and outcomes we've talked about, ought there be a narrower focus in order to get a clear sense of it? So these are the kind of attributes I think about a statement of purpose for anything, but in particular here we're talking about for PILD, is that it does look to the future, and you want to have some of those impacts or outcome statements. If a new person joined Extension and they were talking with you and they said, you know, what is PILD? That purpose statement is what you'd share, and they would at least get a sense of it as being different or unique from other things that they hear about in their orientation or other places that are going on. And sometimes it's a sentence, sometimes it's a paragraph, but it's not a slogan. It's not 1 or 2 or 3 words, although after a purpose statement is developed, it has been somewhat popular to develop a slogan. And it's not technical, so it doesn't say the how you're going to get there part. What other types of characteristics would you add to the list when you think about a powerful statement of purpose?
So this is Allie Mitchell. Missing from this is the audience. So making sure that when a person reads your statement of purpose, they know whether or not it is for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Beth. To piggyback on that, like the purpose. What's the the purpose, the benefit to the reader or participant?
So this is where the question about volunteers, which have been now a little less than 10% of your participants, or whether this is for those who fund people who come to PILD, or whether this is the first thing on your website that you get the framework prior to going into the theme of the year and what the program looks like. So what else for statement of purpose? Anybody else? Something comes to mind?
Well, this is Holly. I don't know if this would be under like impacts and outcomes, but kind of answering this. So what question? So, why is it important?
So the impacts for whom, and trying to keep it at the why level, not the how level. Time for one more. If someone else has something they'd like to share to the group.
I'll join in. I think ultimately our purpose is to improve cooperative extension professionals and supporters' ability to educate funding decision makers on the impact of those public investments. That's if I were telling somebody the purpose of the conference, that's what I would tell them.
Well, you have set up the first of the mock, and I think that was Bill, and made a good transition to our next slide. Why should PILD exist? And one more time with what it was you just said there, Bill, to improve cooperative extension.
I said to improve cooperative extension professionals and supporters' ability to educate funding decision makers on the impact of those public investments.
Okay. Others, and you can sure go back to your list, but as we did the collective list, and as you look at your list, some of the contributions or the impacts and outcomes you saw were somewhere in the why category. So what comes to mind for you for the why category?
This is Beth, because to piggyback on that, Bill, too, because I wonder if people just see this as a national advocacy meeting versus learning how to do this at all levels. You know, and being able to use what you learned at PILD at the state level and that at the local level. And I'm wondering if we don't kind of highlight that's what we should be doing.
Yeah, and you educate federal, state, and local funding decision makers.
Right, how to do that. Yeah, how to do that at all levels.
Yeah.
Right, I think mine I would piggyback on that. You know, from a participant standpoint, the opportunity to learn about extension at the national level and to learn methods of clearly articulating the extension impacts, outcomes, or sharing extension impacts, outcomes, and community improvements. To our, you know, legislators at all levels or community leaders.
Others. And just a reminder, our first chunk of time is trying to sort all possibilities. And then after our break, when you've had a chance to look over some of these notes and so on, is where we want to hone in on various options of how this could look. So we really want to see wide-ranging views in terms of these questions. And we did the pass to one another to begin, and we of course can go back to that, but sometimes someone's thought follows another thought, and it can be point counterpoint, or it can be, I haven't heard anyone say this yet about a why that I think we talked about, or a why that could be. So let's take a few minutes and just see how the open conversation method goes. And otherwise we will we'll go to the more formalized share the mic plan. So who'd like to speak next?
Well, this is Lynette, and I sent out real quickly a little poll to our employees and asked them, our colleagues, and asked them if they have attended PILD, and if so, was it worth their time, and what did they get the most out of the conference? Got quite a few responses back, and primarily it is the learning of strategies basically on how to communicate the public value of extension and how to work with you know, learning the skills on how to work with our elected officials and speak with our elected officials. But these were all colleagues. So I think that training that we do there is extremely important because they mentioned they bring it back to the state, like Karen was saying.
I would certainly agree with that. I think as an attendee and from comments that I've gotten from people over the years that have attended it, I think that's one of the most valuable parts of the program is learning how to approach legislators in a way that they will listen and how we can best influence them.
This is Nadine. I would agree with that. And when I went as a participant, the other thing that really struck home to me was the number of layers things have to go through before change can happen and how slow that evolution really is.
And I think I'm in the same vein. This is Karen. When I talk to participants, they didn't realize how big extension was. So why we should have PILD is to actually give them a true look at cooperative extension at all levels, and how we are likes and how we have our dislikes, but it's still one extension system.
And then when I asked, I'm sorry, but when I asked them if they haven't attended, why haven't they attended? They didn't know about it. They didn't know what PILD was. So that's a marketing issue, a communication issue on our level.
So I'm going to hop in with a sort of different tack. PILD should exist to provide something that doesn't otherwise get provided. It should give them something new and different, or at least useful in a different way.
Yeah, you know, from my perspective, you know, this is the first time, this is the only opportunity I've ever had to understand sort of the structure and the leadership at the national level. You know, I'm an area educator, and I mean, I was drinking from the fire, learning from the fire hose there. At the same time, I was also learning how to tell our story at all levels, and how to bring that knowledge of that structure back to you know, my colleagues here who haven't been to PILD yet. So that's yeah, it's a really unique opportunity for those, at least from my perspective. Now, I'm not sure I'm hitting the, you know, the needs and the interests of volunteers, of administrators, etc. But that's, from my perspective, that's where the phenomenal opportunity lay.
One of the questions I noted, I believe, Lila, from you was, should PILD be part of more of an engagement process, whereby when you have a gathering of a federal group to talk about extension and how that might impact the budget. As it appears to be described now, it is education with both the understanding of the structure, perhaps what is in the budget, as well as how to tell the story. So just be interested in people's reaction to PILD as helping create a budgeting process for the federal level. And maybe, Lila, you can restate that. That was, I believe that was you.
Yeah, I did mention that at the very beginning. And I don't know that that's what PILD has done in the past. I don't think it has done that. And I don't think our curriculum has focused on that in the past. One of the questions that came up initially about the timing of PILD, though, was related to that. And so if we want to be more engaged in influencing how the budget is proposed, then that would suggest a different kind of curriculum than, I believe, than the one that we have typically presented at PILD. It's a different nuance. It's the difference between what do you do and what's the process in order to build the budget in the way that you want it built, as opposed to what do you do and what's the process for supporting, for telling the story and supporting the organization and the budgets that have been proposed. So it's a really different approach, and it's not one that I believe PILD has focused on in the past, but it is a question that has come up periodically about whether PILD should be engaged in that way.
So that thought and question again, we're trying to think creatively and forward be interested in folks' reaction to that. And again, we're not saying it'd be in place of or more important. We're just trying to seek out a variety of possibilities for really upping the potential and the impact of PILD. So who'd like to comment first on Lila's nuance there?
I will. I guess in thinking back, we have focused more on justifying the money that we have received, budgetary money for extension, more than projecting what might be needs in the future.
This is Ellie Mitchell. I'm going to add another nuance. It's building off of Lila's, but not directly addressing the question of how to go about informing the budget. I think that by being in DC, PILD provides an opportunity for folks who otherwise would have little to no interaction with the policy structure in Washington, DC, to engage with it and understand it. And that is, yes, congressional appropriators, yes, congressional authorizers, yes, NIFA structure, but also all of the many touch points they have and they are empowered to use to different extents at their universities to inform the way that our federal partner works, for example, right? The fact that you can respond at the bottom of every RFA, there's a line that says, if you have questions or recommendations, please reach out to X person. How to do that reaching out in a way that is productive and helpful and informs the federal partner and creates a two-way street between them and us at all levels. It is another part of the policy engagement structure that we could be really doing some solid education on.
You know, another thing that causes me to think about is that very often I think we look at these kinds of activities as one and done, and it isn't. And even though we may be, or PILD in the past has really focused on supporting extension and supporting our federal budget, and telling the story about how that money is used, that information is oftentimes used in the future as legislation develops. And as members of Congress become more familiar with extension over the years, they are more inclined to act differently, if you will, in terms of financial allocation than they would be if we had not had that opportunity to educate over the years. And so I don't want us to get caught up, I guess, in this issue of, are we influencing the amount of money in the budget, or are we just supporting the budget that's there? Because the reality is, this is knowledge that builds over time. And any member of Congress, just like any of us, continues to learn over time. And so the more opportunities you have to educate members of Congress or county commissioners or members of your state legislature or whatever, the more opportunity you have to do that over the years, the better opportunity, hopefully, you will have of getting positive outcomes in terms of the budget down the line.
Keep going. Other either questions of clarification for a couple of these points that have brought out about engagement and informing the budget when you do have people from all levels of your system present, and as well, possibly, I think I'm hearing a both and of supporting the budget because it's not one and done, and or as Allie I'm just going to use education on the policy engagement structure and the various players and the role in terms of the extension system as another scenario. So offer up either another why and or comment on any of the big whys that have been put out so far. Who's next?
A couple thoughts come to mind. Tying to Lila's, level of touch across the year, I think that's critical and important. And because of our proximity to Washington, when we prepare our team, we try to do that, whether it's, the 4-H, youth have been there the week before, or they're with us, or our FS&E group has been there, and so we talk to our folks, so we know what some of those touches are so that we can reference them. And there might be an opportunity to reference, some other national touches that we may not be aware of, and for example, even, well, Carrot was here in January, well, what were those outcomes nationally? I mean, what were they talking about nationally? When it ties to the budget, as I've prepared our team, we've walked down that winding road because, that ties to Bob's comment about showing our impacts of what the budget has done, currently versus that future look of a budget. But then we also always get that the one pager of what, sort of what's that national ask. And I think there's, we can't have advocacy. We can only have education from our state. And I know other states are similar or walking down that line. We're always, talking about the budget that, it allows us to increase our impact, based on these type of things that we're doing now. We could widen our reach and those type of things. But then there's also that, you're with those legislators and they're like, what do you need? What can we do for you? They want to know what you want. So finding a way to navigate through, well, more money would be awesome, and not being able to say that exactly, I don't have an exact answer, but those are things that have, hit us when we're in that legislator's office. And, our team, as we prepare, want to know, how do I navigate through that and not cross a line?
Thank you. Who's next? Just have about 2 more minutes or so, and I'll try to give you those cues for those of you who have thoughts and are just trying to know when we might, move to the next question. So about 2 more minutes on this one.
Donna Ray, something else that I've thought about a lot more in the last couple of years in particular is this issue of helping professionals, extension professionals, and our volunteers learn how to talk with decision makers to tell the story in language that they understand, instead of in scientific speak or in professional speak or in acronym speak or something like that. And in the last few years, we've had a couple of speakers that have I think, helped shed some light on the language that we use and how we actually tell that story to more of a what you'd call general audience, or someone who is not familiar at all with extension and what it is we do and the programs that we have. So doing that, I think, is something that is a really important part of how we articulate our message and how we really tell the story in a way that it can be heard and understood by someone who doesn't know us.
Thank you. Anyone else? The why.
So this is Terrence. Heard that we said that we go there and it seems as if we're telling the federal partner who doesn't know us, but the federal politician knows our local people, and I think we need to kind of educate our local people additionally on how to educate that federal politician on the importance of our work and everything. I think they listen to their local politician, that local voter. They listen to local voter a little bit more freely than they listen to us. You know, we can give our speech, our spiel, but that local voter that sits in the same church with us that we're feeling about extension, when they tell the politician, it means more probably than when we tell them.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point, is we can be very good at telling our own story, and we should be, but the reality is decision makers pay attention to those people who benefit from our educational programs and our services much more so than they do to us.
So let's go to that question. Who might best or most effectively make this difference? And this is, as we looked at the volunteer participation and that point in time where this committee included those. And again, we have a few scenarios that I think are emerging, but it seems like some themes are more educators or advocates who understand the whole system, local, state, and federal, who are then able to be more effective with supporting, holding on the informing of the extension budget, and that's at the various levels. So who might, as you think about this, who might best or most effectively make this difference? And the who, I guess one assumption I would have is they don't necessarily need to be in the room at the PILD conference in DC, because there can be strategies where things can be done at other levels, as several of you have brought up. But in order to get to some of this big why you've talked about, say more about who might make this difference. And I'm wondering, the woman who did the, I think you said you looked at colleagues with the little poll that you gave about what did you get out of PILD. I'm wondering if anyone has any data about volunteers and what they get out as opposed to extension paid professionals, whether they're administrative or in the various roles throughout the system. And so just if there's any data anyone has to share about the who first, and then straight up for the future of PILD, who might be best or most effective toward the big whys we've been talking about. So who'd like to start?
This is Karen. May I answer the second part? I find that our clients, the recipients of our program, the recipients of our resources are, I think, are good advocates for us, because they can actually express how their lives have changed by the resources and the education that they have learned through the extension system. So I would say the clients and our audience, our end users would be very effective.
So this is Lynette again, and I feel I totally agree with what was just shared, and I totally agree with what Lila shared earlier, but I also feel that it's very important that we as extension professionals also approach those stakeholders. I found during our Hill visits after PILD is the assistants that, you know, that we usually don't get to speak to the actual elected official, but their staff want to know how we can help them. You know, what is it that we can do as extension to help them with this situation that is happening in this particular community? So I think we're just as important as the volunteers. But I do totally agree with the volunteer statement. Whenever the Oregon legislature is going to cut extension, 4-H storms the castle, and it's those kids that manage to save the budget. So that's important as well. But I think we're looking at two different things. We're looking at being able to get our own professionals, our own colleagues able to advocate for ourselves, for our extension service, and then also our volunteers to advocate for the extension service.
I think one of the things I think Lila mentioned, you know, this should not be a one and done. And I agree. I think the most effective advocates for extension are the people that we've served and provided education that improved their lives. I mean, that's a pretty powerful message. The thing that maybe that we haven't emphasized is that not everyone can afford to go to Washington, D.C. and do what we do at PILD. And maybe one of the things that needs to be emphasized is the importance of going back and sharing the training that we get as professionals with our stakeholders so that they're able to advocate, particularly at the state and local level. And I'm not sure that we've ever taken that approach.
Is there a set, are there any states that do that formally, where they purposely go to get the information to bring it back to their colleagues in their extension service that anybody knows of off the top of their head? Oh, interesting. Okay. I think that'd be an excellent approach to take what we learned there, and even because we want to make sure then that we're not only doing the federal level but the state and local as well. So if there's information that the attendees can go back and bring to their colleagues, that would be ideal. It's a nice model.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, I don't know of a state in particular that does exactly what we're talking about. I mean, what we're talking about is more of almost like a train the trainer model, or incorporating that train the trainer kind of model into PILD. One of the things that we could think about, however, is I don't know how many, but I do know some extension services have advisory councils. And I don't know the extent to which those advisory councils are used for advocacy purposes, but I know that they are in some cases. And so we could actually begin to think about building a system to help extension directors and administrators not only create statewide, and for that matter, county directors creating countywide advisory councils that have a partial purpose, perhaps, in advocacy. And this could be a way to create, if you will, a curriculum that they could take back to their individual states and individual counties or individual institutions to begin to utilize, or to begin to build that advocacy cadre at the local level.
Good comments, Lila.
Yeah, this is Nadine. I really like that idea. We just recently went from an agent association advisory to the JSEP model, where all of the associations are active in it. And a lot of the questions right now center around, well, what's going to be the purpose of a Kansas JSEP? This would give it a purpose where you could take that curriculum back and actually do some training locally then, or within the state.
Well, and I think probably in most cases, there's a lot more freedom that you have as an extension professional to advocate or educate at the local level than there is as you move up the ranks, because a lot of the, maybe not a lot, but some of the universities do not allow members to, or their faculty or professionals to meet with their legislators when they go to PILD. And bringing that back and using that at the local level by sharing with your stakeholders would be a real plus.
And this is Tony. And while I think the volunteer component is something for us to keep in mind, I think it's also critical that we keep in mind what the purpose of JSEP is, and JSEP being the bringing together the 7 different professional organizations of our extension system with the purpose to provide professional development to our extension staff. And again, it's important for volunteers to be a part of it, but I'm not sure that we would want that to be the primary focus of our PILD. Just a personal thought.
This is Allie Mitchell. I'm back. I had to step out. But I want to affirm what was just said. I think it's a really important central point. And I also this is making me call up a conversation I had with somebody at JSEP. Bob, it might have been you, I don't remember. When I was asking about the purpose of PILD, and one of the things was that JSEP has 2 opportunities to make money over the course of the year, and this is one of them. It's not something to forget about if that is, in fact, one of the business endpoints.
Yeah, I just wanted to continue on that JSEP and professional association track for a few minutes in terms of participation in PILD. How do those of you who are on this committee communicate back to the association, and then with the 300 or 275 or so who come, are there differentials among professional associations or the specialty focus areas like agriculture, youth, and so on in regard to current PILD participation? And again, we're trying to press toward future, but just a little bit more on that for someone who might know.
What was your question, Donna, about the participation among the organization?
Well, I understand the committee has reps from the professional associations, and I'm trying to understand whether agriculture participates more heavily, or whether there's, what the kind of mix is amongst the professional associations.
I guess from my experience of monitoring where the participation comes from, I would say that the participation is kind of correlated with the number of members that there are in the organizations. For example, the 4 larger organizations, FCS, NACAA, NAE4HA, and ESP are the larger organizations. They tend to have the larger participation at PILD. The other 3 organizations are smaller in their membership numbers, and their participation is also smaller. But I would say that it's kind of correlated to the members. In other words, an organization that has half the membership of another organization may have half the participants that the larger organization has at PILD.
I ask that partly because this concept of policy engagement educators that would receive a sense of training and then, quote, take it back to others, your mix of participants may differ widely if you go to an extension advisory council or that kind of mix. And again, it's neither good nor bad, but it just might shift it. Other comments on whose involvement in PILD seems very important for the the various aims or whys we've put forward?
I have one thing to share. In that little quick soul survey I sent out to our folks, the individuals who would like to attend PILD but normally don't have the ability to are our office managers. The front office, the first people that our clientele see, they're not part of these, often not part of these associations because they're not program faculty, so they don't have the ability to attend PILD. And so I started thinking, well, they don't have any of this kind of training, yet they are now, in Oregon anyway, becoming the county leaders, if you wish to say it that way. They're the ones that are responsible, or it's on their position descriptions. We're all responsible, but it's in their position descriptions to actually develop relationships with our elected officials, yet they're not the ones that attend this particular conference. So as we think about this train the trainer or open it up more to some of these other professional faculty, I think we should keep that particular group of people in mind, because they are the first ones that our clientele meet, and now could very well be the ones that present budgets and all of that to our elected officials.
Well, I think it's important to point out they're not excluded. That if they're not attending, the reason that they're not attending or not able to attend is a resource issue, not a restricted issue, because I mean, essentially they would be no different than a volunteer. There's no requirement that you be a member of one of the 7 organizations to attend. So, but obviously resources would be the limiting factor, I would guess.
Yeah, Rob, Bob, I totally agree with you. I think as far as the way that we handle it, oh, boy, there really is a back. The way we handle it in Oregon, anyway, is each association pays for their representative to go, and the extension admin, for the most part, pays for our volunteer to go. So I think part of it is how we market it in our state. That's how I said sometimes I think the marketing is a weak point, and that's our fault, as in Oregon's fault, or my representation on PILD's issue. So, but I thought it was a point to be taken here in Oregon anyway. If these individuals are going to be our county leaders and our point of contact with our elected officials, they're ones that need to be at this conference, or we do the train the trainer version and come back to Oregon with it. So I'm just speaking on the one aspect, one state, one of the 50 states, a thought there.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point. And the issue, I think, becomes how teams are formulated. And I don't know how every extension director makes decisions about formulating their teams. But I think when PILD was initially started, it was because it was a product of JSEP and of the professional associations. I think many extension directors, in fact, formulated their teams around those professional associations. And so I don't know that we have had a discussion with, either with JSEP or the PILD committee, or with extension directors and administrators about how they form their team and what the options are for forming the teams. So I think this is a really important discussion that we simply, for as long as I've been involved with PILD, we've never had this discussion about how the teams are formulated and who forms them, and likewise who pays for them.
I'd like to make a comment on that, and some of you know our Maryland approach. But Donna, you asked like who's out there on the team, and they are part of different associations. But we look for a variety of representation on our, and we usually bring between 10 and 15 each year. And we want to make sure that we have both geographic representation across the state as well as professional track representation, although we have had administrative or business managers attend, because I open it up to who's interested, and then we figure out where those funds are coming from. But I have to do a budget justification, and part of that is the professional development component that deals with, what are the benefits of learning, about how to articulate that message. And, I think, touching the, and presenting to the associate deans and directors about the value of a professional development from a JSEP perspective has been critical for our state to be supportive. And our state, that associate dean and director funds that. So I'm getting, $13,000 to $15,000 a year. And we get some offsets from some of the state, associations, or someone might get a national offset, and we'll gladly take those funds as, to offset the total amount. But we've been able to show those impacts. We've had, even one of our past participants, has had a juried article, being published about the impacts of PILD and the benefits of PILD to him in his early career as a tenure track faculty. And I think, that's helped us, support the why for attending PILD and for funding that. And, while I do agree and appreciate that there's an opportunity for that train the trainer perspective, and I think that would work well, and we should think about that. But in Maryland, we've also, I'll say, built our army. Those who have attended PILD have taught PILD, who've talked to others, oh, you really need to do this. This is a great experience. And we've built that legislative group that we're using at the local level, to share that, because they've gotten this experience, both in our prep work that we do before we go to PILD, because we do some training, prior to, and then the national PILD experience gives them that confidence and some of those learning tools to come back and use that, and they do that. And that's, they're using that information after to make those additional touches locally.
Thank you. The question earlier too was, what kind of expectations do those who attend PILD have clarified after they attend? And it sounds like yours is to be the educator advocates on behalf and work with your system. And one of the possibilities we're thinking about now is possibly some or others who might also be more, to use the word, train the trainer. And maybe there's a blended way to do a couple of those. But say a little bit more about when you ask someone to join and come to PILD, what you ask for them after the PILD experience.
For Maryland, you mean? Well, I'll tell you, as a prep, they are required to attend, 2 conference calls and a face-to-face training workshop where we teach how to craft an elevator speech, and they have to do the research on that legislator so that they understand, and like one participant takes, each of our legislators and then provides a 1-pager to the entire group, so, because, sometimes those legislative meetings shift, but it allows you to understand, what committees are they on, what are their interests, and that allows us to have those discussions about how do those interests tie to the extension work that we do. And then post-conference, right after they meet with those legislative, contacts, we have a paper that they're required to fill out before they leave the Hill, or under pressure from Karen, that it has to be that I receive it fairly quickly. And it has, who do they meet with? What do they talk about? What were their interests? Have they attended any of our events? What questions did they have? And so they have to provide a report back, and then I provide a consolidated report to our associate dean and director, about what's going on. And some of them are, if it's a larger, contact that they want information on or they want to participate in, we don't wait for the larger report to come out. We make sure that the associate dean or the dean or whomever, gets that understanding and, get the appropriate people involved. And we've had that, which has been wonderful. But they have to do that post report, and then I draw on that team as I look for my next year's team.
And then do you draw on that team when there's a statewide legislative effort where you want a skilled person, or do you tend to have this be your federal team?
There are federal teams and there are local teams, and I feel like and just to be honest, I think Maryland, we've lost some opportunity there that I've pushed for, could we do more things at the state level? But we have some restrictions on state legislative outreach based on our university, because they don't necessarily want, they want a university approach reaching out, or at the dean's level, but we're certainly there. They draw, the dean will definitely draw on us and our experience, and different things on crafting his message. but we don't have that direct access at the state level but that's based on our unique state structure with the university. But certainly at the local level, they are armed and ready to share our message and do that all the time. And then at the federal level, we have a lot of representation out in the field, the way our state's close to Washington, but we have a lot, so either those legislators will come out into the field across the state, or, I'm, like 2.5 hours from Washington, we have local representatives that come to our activities all the time. So we use that as an additional touch. Our faculty have been to field to share that message with them, and share that, what they're, and most of them are faculty, those outputs and impacts that they're having in the field tied to that legislator's message, because they know that legislator's message and what their interests are or what committees they're on. So we're building it that way.
Thank you. We're on the who, but I wanted to just clarify a little bit, because I think the question we're at is, what do we ask from people who participate in PILD, either as prerequisites, and then it's assumed they'll attend the conference, but also afterward. And all those parts will increase the overall impact of the PILD experience. So others on this same topic of who, or ways that you approach formulating your team, or what your prerequisites are, or your expectations after they leave the PILD conference for back in your state, either locally, as Karen said, or at a statewide level?
This is Karen Munden, and I want to speak on behalf of the NEAFCS Association. Each year, we ask states to send in impacts that they are doing within their states. And what we do, we formulate fact sheets, and it's representative of everyone across the United States. During the PILD, we help our association members to be able to talk about FCS, not only in their state, but what's happening in the states across the nation on a particular topic. This year we had 9 topics. And then when they leave, we ask them to continue to relate the impacts to their local legislators and powers that be. From the all individuals that do go to PIL have to write an article of things they learned and things that they could take home. So once they leave the PIL, they have to write a small article informing others who did not have the opportunity to attend PILs, what they learned and why they should be a part of PILs. But that's across the nation with NEAFCS.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions of that, or are other of the professional associations do something with their membership in regard to creating their message for PILD?
For any 4-HA, we don't have an expectation for our members either before or after. We do provide a $200 stipend for one person per state to come to PILD and participate, and as a way to incentivize making sure that we have people there. But I think what we heard from Maryland is a really unique situation, and I think if there were some more states that were more formalized as they are with their PILD team, I think we could see some tremendous strides in the outcomes of PILD. Speaking, just as an individual from Indiana who has participated, not only as an association rep, but also for the national level, but also for our state association. Our PILD team each year is made up solely of the officer, one officer from each of the association representatives here in Indiana. It's kind of an expectation of that particular year for that particular office that you're in. Other than going there and coming back and representing and going to the Hill on behalf of the university, there's really no other expectation from that. But I really like the model that Maryland has, and maybe we could get something like that put together across the nation with others.
As I looked at Bob's pre-work here about the past and future, it looked like in about 2002 or 3, the National Leadership Seminar, which was focused on the state officers, was blended into this conference. So it sounds like some states may still be using that method and others have formulated it differently. So we're getting into about the last 2 to 3 minutes on this question of who might best or most effectively lead to the PILD impact or differences. So who also would like to contribute to this question?
I just comment that the two states that probably have sent the most folks to the conference have been Wisconsin and North Carolina, and that includes their volunteers. And I know at least Wisconsin has a program that's similar to what Maryland does, where they're pretty highly involved in training and uniting in one message that they take to the Hill. Now they actually choose to do that at the conference. Typically they meet that first morning to have a breakfast meeting, and then meet again and refine their message on Tuesday before they go to the Hill on Wednesday. So it's a different approach, but basically the same type of program as they do in Maryland. I'm not sure what North Carolina does, but I do know that they've been very active.
The one who that we haven't talked about is the extension directors and administrators. So I'm curious about, that's been somewhat stable, but dipped to 31 in 2018, 34 in 2019. Who participates and why would you see in regard to the director administrators, and how would you want their participation in this conference going forward?
Well, I think Lila and Allie would be the best to talk about that. But I will say that in the case of Wisconsin, their director has led those 2 sessions that I just talked about and accompanied their group to the Hill. And so they've been very intimately involved in it, but I'm not sure about the others. But again, Lila and Allie probably have better comment on that.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to observe over the years, because and to talk with various extension directors and administrators who do attend PILD or who do not attend PILD. And in some cases, I've talked with extension directors who've been there year after year after year after year, and what they say to me is they do that because of the message that it sends to the team of people that they send or that they bring with them. The message about importance, and the message that this is taken seriously, and the message that you are part of a larger system, not just attending A1 conference. I mean, it's similar to what Karen was saying about Maryland. It's one part of a larger system that they utilize within their institutions. And so that's where it makes sense. What I think about with extension directors and administrators, and this is, I mean, I'm from the Western region, so I think about the West a lot, but as I look even across the nation, the turnover in extension directors and administrators that we're going through right now and will continue to go through probably over the next few years is tremendous. And so we have brand new people coming into those roles, many of whom don't have a clue about PILD or how to really organize this kind of a systematic advocacy effort. And so I think we have an opportunity here to really help extension directors create an advocacy system within their institutions. Now, whether it's the actual extension director or administrator who attends every year, or whether they appoint someone from their administrative team who provides leadership for this, much in the same way that Karen from Maryland does for their team, I think is probably less important than whether, you know, it's the actual extension director administrator who attends, as long as the extension director administrator knows why they're doing this and expresses and shows its importance once people get back home. Because if that doesn't happen, either by their attendance or once the team gets back home, then it's a one-time professional development opportunity for the people who attend, and that's it.
So I'll just add, with exceptions, Maryland being a huge one, the directors in the Northeast region don't attend PILD generally, in part because they don't, as a unit, see or understand the value of the entire event. And I hope that this conversation will help change that, but it is not part of a unified advocacy effort. If they're going to do advocacy, it's going through CARET. They go to CARET Oz, not to PILD. That might just be an effect of the goal for PILD was not something that really rang for them as far as something that required their attendance. It might have been a communication issue. It could be any number of things, but if we're looking, I think we should really dig into the question of whether or not we're looking for PILD to serve directors as a primary audience, or if we are hoping to set up sort of a communication strategy to the directors that lets them know the value of PILD to their state's system and the power that they have or that they could wield in attending. It's my opinion that it's just going to make the purpose of PILD more diffuse should the extension directors be a primary audience. But I hear, Lila, when you say that the directors that come often talk about it as a show of support and a show of strength, and I would love to be able to give a message to the directors that says, look, here's what going to PILD can do for a team, because it has these clear goals and it's going to address those clear goals in this way, and this is how that helps you. Also, just so you know, some of your colleagues are going because X, Y, and Z reasons.
And Allie and Lila, this is Bill. I guess as I'm listening to this conversation, there's been several things brought forward that indicate that some extension directors find this useful in building their leadership bench. Maybe not for their own replacement, but building a cadre of people that could step into the ultimate succession of leadership, within their states, and this would be very valuable to information, to not only be able to understand, but also to be able to communicate. And I'm wondering if that's not a primary goal that we discussed, and it probably shouldn't be a primary goal of PILD, but I would think that is an important side benefit that, somebody said, I'm just an area director and I don't know a lot about these things. Only after you become knowledgeable about some of these things, might you be consider for bigger and better things, or maybe not only after, but shortly after, or being knowledgeable of the system as a whole might help you in your career advancement, and not only help you, but help the university groom you for advancement. And I don't know, I might be mischaracterizing that because, frankly, I've never led a statewide system. I've been a participant, but never really an extension leader. So I would look for Allie and Lila to either confirm or refute what I just said.
In the Northeast, at least, that's not how they're viewing it now. Not to say that it couldn't be viewed as that in the future. And I think you're really hitting on something strong, which is that, we've talked about the goals of PILD as being able to advocate for, educate congressional members about the budget, what we would need from the budgetary process, or how they appropriate affects what's going on in their states. And then comfort with the policy system and the larger structure of extension. It's not a far leap for me as a convener of the directors to be able to look at a refreshed PILD and say, you might not be viewing PILD as a leadership development because it's not in the name and it's not the primary goal, but it is that in these ways.
I want to speak to that for a moment from Maryland. We've taken the professional development approach because it's really, strengthening our team from that level. The common theme, which reflects on Bill's comments, that I get back from, what did you like the most about your PIL experience? Because I do ask that question to each team, and I've done it for a number of years, is the confidence it builds in being able to articulate our message. They may know the message, but this, being able to do this, and it's like, once I've talked to someone at the federal level, it's very easy to talk to our county commissioner or whomever. And I do think, tied to carrot versus PILD, it shouldn't be an either or. I think if we have a big opportunity, and whether it's JSEP leadership or whomever, to get into the face and in front of our associate deans and directors to share the benefits of it, whether they come directly or they assign folks to come. It does strengthen that team. And I see both sides. Like when Nick Place came and we literally were in a small elevator on Capitol Hill together at that point with Representative Van Hollen, who's now Senator Van Hollen, and it was Nick's name tag that had them talk about extension, and Van Hollen's sister was a master gardener, and it was literally the elevator experience, which I use in my training, in all the years since that's happened. So having Nick there, and he's that type of charismatic leader that makes that happen, that does strengthen that team and show that value. But then I'll tell you, in a different leadership style, Jim Hansen, who's just as equally as supportive while he's not attended PILD, he comes and speaks to our folks that are coming, when we have our face-to-face, and shares and values their support in taking this on as an extra activity to represent who we are and what we are, and building on that message of why extension is important.
And with that, we're going to shift to our last question, which is about the timing of PILD. And again, the introduction of that is the appetite to have a better sense of where education and advocacy happens within extension across the calendar year. And indeed, it seemed like it was this tail wagging the dog question, the time of year, that actually was a precipitous to this framework conversation about PILD. So you see the question, and again, we're thinking broadly with different scenarios about convening and what time of year, and then maybe more importantly, when you think about it, the why. Why would it make sense that time of year? So who'd like to start?
Well, I'll go ahead and start it. I guess it was earlier this year, the discussion was as to whether we would be more beneficial to be earlier in the year because of the place that would put us in the budgetary process. We also talked about perhaps being there at the same time as the carrot group. And essentially, there became good arguments for both, probably. I think probably the argument that that was made for staying where we're at is the fact that repeatedly sending the same message to decision makers may be more advantageous than having a large number of people speaking the same message at the same time. So that's kind of what started it.
And I think that was Bob. When does the carrot group come to Washington?
They come in March, so they're typically about a month before the PILD conference.
The other group that does spend some time on the Hill is 4-H conference group, and I do wonder at times. I think there are a few times in the past PILD and 4-H conference have overlapped their time on the Hill. There are advantages and disadvantages from what I understand in trying to coordinate those. I mean, the last time that happened, I think we made a concerted effort to try to coordinate instead of both showing up and there being some misunderstandings among congressional staff about, wait a minute, didn't we already talk to you? Or we already have an appointment with you, or whatever. And I think that it did work better when we purposefully coordinated than when we didn't purposefully coordinate. But I do wonder if we could be even more effective if we were about a month apart with each one. In other words, if Carrot came in February or March and somebody else came in April and somebody else came in May or something like that, I do wonder if maybe we could even be more effective if we looked at an overall strategy like that. Those are the three groups in particular that I'm aware of that would be connected to extension. I mean, there are other opportunities, I'm sure, but those are the three that I'm aware of that are the biggies.
Yeah, and then Lila, don't forget, during June and July, Citizenship Washington Focus Conference that takes place at National 4-H Conference Center. There are over a 6-week time period. Part of that is for those youth to be able to go to Capitol Hill as well.
Yeah, that is a very good point. In fact, one of the things that Jennifer Sarangelo has talked with me about is she's indicated that there is woefully little preparation for those young people to go to the Hill, and she would really appreciate some additional counsel and guidance and involvement in helping them prepare so that we all really do take the same message. You have the same message from Carrot, you have the same message from the 4-H kids that go in April, you have the same message from PILD, and you have the same message from the 4-H kids that are there during the summer. And doing some coordination that way would be really important. So that's a very good point. Thanks for reminding me of that.
Actually, that might be an opportunity for those extension professionals that went to the PILD conference to utilize some of their skills and knowledge that they picked up there to help to train the kids that would be coming from, for the July or June and July conferences.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is going to depend upon who the individual state coordinator is for the Washington Focus Group. But it sounds like the congressional staff are inundated with extension folks during the spring and summer, but then it's the fall and winter months that they don't hear from us. Is that correct?
I think that's pretty much correct. And we did talk about that, and the thing that kind of causes some difficulty there is that's when by and large, that's when the seven organizations are holding their annual conferences, typically in the fall. So
I guess the question is, do we need to really, if we're going to look at this, do we need to focus on moving PILD to a time where they're not being inundated, or is it best to go ahead and inundate them, all of our legislative staff during the spring and summer months, so we know that they're at least getting somebody on a regular basis during the first half of the year? And I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, that is a really good question, and we probably would need to seek some advice from an organization like Cornerstone, perhaps, our Cornerstone Government Affairs that we hire to lobby on our behalf, to seek their input. As I think about federal budgets and how that typically happens in the, September 30th, October 1st is the end and the beginning of the federal fiscal year. And so things are typically a little crazy during that particular time of year with federal budgets, simply because they're trying to get them passed. And in recent years, we've had continuing service resolutions for nearly, I think, every year. And so those continuing service resolutions go sometimes weeks, sometimes months. And then you get into, I don't remember the exact date, but I think it's around the 1st of February is when the president's budget for the next federal fiscal year is due. And then it's that federal budget that everyone begins to react and respond to, including members of Congress. Now, in recent years, that federal budget has also been delayed. And so it's kind of difficult to get a handle on when the best time of the year would be. But I think it would behoove us, before making a final decision about that, to have some conversations with Cornerstone Government Affairs to seek their advice.
Thank you, Lila. And on that note, I'm going to call time because we have reached our maximum. I know we talked about 90 minutes being preferable for the seat time, but I think the full 2 hours was very rich to hear from each of you. So we will reconvene in 1 hour now, and it will be at the same link. Is that right, Bob, or is there any other information that we need to?
No, that's correct. I got it changed so we have the same link that you came on for this session.
Very good. And I will check the chat box and also work on compiling some of the notes. So those of you at your email, check your email shortly before we reconvene for some written notes. And then we're going to, again, try to come up with what are some of the options that combinations of ways to put the outcomes together with the people and so on. And so that's where we're going. So enjoy your hour break, and we'll be back in 1 hour.